is The Opinions, a show that brings you a mix of voices from New York Times opinion. You've heard the news. Here's what to make of it.
I'm Patrick Healy, deputy editor of New York Times Opinion. And this is The First 100 Days, a weekly series examining President Trump's use of power and his drive to change America.
Speaker Johnson, Vice President Vance.
On Tuesday night, in his speech to Congress, Trump spun a narrative about a powerful America that I think a lot of Americans are really going to like.
The media and our friends in the Democrat Party kept saying we needed new legislation. We must have legislation to secure the border. But it turned out that all we really needed was a new president.
He framed the country and his presidency as dominant, certain, optimistic, while the opposition party was reduced to waving little placards. It reminded me a bit of Reagan in 1981. Trump looked strong on offense, the Democrats looked soft on defense. But Trump was also masking something. He was elected to fix inflation and bring order to America. He hasn't done it, and if he can't, no campaign-style speech is going to trick Americans to forget how hard they have it. You can use rhetoric, but only so far. This week, I wanted to talk to my colleague David Brooks, because he's captured the changes in society and America with such insight in recent years. David has also written about two things on my mind after Tuesday's speech. The patriots in Ukraine who once inspired so many Republicans, and about Trump as a populist pretender. How does Trump use power, language, rhetoric to exercise dominance, even if it's hollow? David, thanks for being here.
Well, great to be with you, Patrick.
David, so let's start with Trump's speech from Tuesday night. What surprised you, if anything?
He got a kid into West Point. I've never seen a president do that.
Right? He was handing out gifts, like it was Christmas.
I was looking under my chair. Maybe I got something too. I think a little what surprised me is a bit of what you said. I thought the word used and the word I used in response last night was dominant. It was a dominant speech. Politically, I thought it was a very good speech. Country wants change. Here's a guy who says, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. And so, people like me don't like a lot of the changes he's doing. But for half the country that supports Donald Trump, they're fine with it and they're happy with it. His approvals are up a tick since he won election. And then there were just so many dramatic personal moments. I mean, he is a TV performer.
Yes.
And, the moment with that cute kid, DJ, who wants to become a cop, who is suffering from brain cancer. Widows were recognized. And there were just a lot of dramatic moments for people to think, wow, that's a good guy. And then the Democrats, as you say, I thought they should have just sat there. There's just no upside. And I thought some of the screaming and Al Green's walking out. When Marjorie Taylor Greene behaved shamefully, a lot of progressive commentators were, rightly offended. And you got to have some intellectual consistency. You can't oppose Marjorie Taylor Greene and then think what Al Green did was totally fine. I just thought the Democrats were losing their way until the response. Liz Slotkin's response, I thought, was excellent.
Look, the president talked a big game on the economy, but it's always important to read the fine print. So, do his plans actually help Americans get ahead? Not even close.
She spoke in a way that appeals to swing voters. She didn't talk like she was coming out of Washington, D.C. or some faculty club. She talked about the big issues in a big way, in a way that will appeal to people who are undecided. And that was a kind of message the Democratic Party can build on.
David, it's so important to underscore that with speeches like this, a lot of Americans aren't sitting there with a scorecard, just kind of like rating and fact-checking and assessing policies. It is about how these speeches make people feel. And it's that moment that you touched on about the young boy who wanted to be a cop, who was kind of lifted up and sworn in the Secret Service. I mean, that is the moment when my phone blew up from both Republicans, Democrats, and people who I hear from in politics, because Trump made people feel something with moments like that. And again, it's not that people in America are sitting around doing a fact check on these speeches. They're looking to feel the impact of them.
Yeah, and we'll take for a couple other examples. He talked about all the people allegedly getting Social Security benefits, even though they're 160 years old. Now, people like us, we're media obsessed, so we know that that was all disproven, that there really are no 320-year-old people getting Social Security benefits. There are no 160-year-olds getting those benefits. That story has been shot down by Trump's own Social Security administrator. But when you're sitting there reading and you're just a normal person who pays normal attention to politics, you think, wow, that's ridiculous. I'm glad he's getting rid of this stuff.
Yep.
If there's one through line in this administration so far, it's the amassing of power. And if there's another strategy through line through this administration, it's the destruction of anything that might restrain power. And so that's bureaucracy. He fired in the military. He fired the JAGs. In the agencies, he fired the inspectors general. He goes off the media because we're a potential restraint on his power. And so really it's just so far the amassing of power and the destruction of anything that would restrain power. That I do think is the through line.
So, David, I wanted to bear down on the point you made about the Democrats on Tuesday night and how they look to you. I guess what I'm wondering, David, is what does effective opposition look like for Democrats? What should they have done, not only Tuesday night, but just right now in dealing with the Trump fire hose?
Yeah, I would advise Democrats to take some time off. They're not in control. They don't have power. But mostly a lot of the categories Democrats have used to understand reality don't describe actual reality. I don't think Democrats have coped with the fact that they're more the party of the elites now than the party of the working class. I don't think they expected so many black and brown voters to go for Donald Trump. And it just takes an intellectual revolution to adjust. And they have to make some fundamental decisions. Do they want to work really hard to once again become the party of the working class? Is that even possible? Mm-hmm. Joe Biden tried with good economic policies. Large percentage of his benefits from all his various actions went to working class voters. It did him no political benefit because you can't solve with economics a problem that's fundamentally about culture and respect. And so maybe they should do that. Or maybe they should accept the fact we're the party of the college-educated and urban classes. And that's who we are, and we're going to represent those people, and hopefully we'll build some majorities around those people. And going back to the 19th century, Andrew Jackson in the 1830s, who's the closest politician we've ever had to Donald Trump. Andrew Jackson, who, like Trump, was a narcissist, was power hungry, and didn't fundamentally know what he was doing to screw up. And lo and behold, Andrew Jackson made a terrible decision to close the second bank of the United States. And the end result was basically a decade-long depression. And so Democrats right now, I think, have to wait for Donald Trump to screw up. And I think the tariffs may be that screw up. Maybe the policy toward Ukraine will be that screw up. But I'm assuming that a guy who doesn't know what he's doing will make some major errors, and then the Democrats will see some opportunities.
Yeah. David, what about the Democrats who care less about strategy and seeming savvy, but instead feel like, you know what, I have values, I have morals, I want to stick up for trans kids playing sports in school? What do they do when they feel like they're left kind of in the political wilderness, that they're leaderless, that they have values, but somehow they need to put them on the shelf for a while because they're not in power?
Well, I'll go back to Abraham Lincoln. The guy hated slavery and wanted to get rid of slavery, but he knew he could only move at the speed of the country. Mm-hmm. And that speed was not fast enough for Frederick Douglass and people like that. But in my view, it was the only way to do it. You couldn't say we're fighting this war to end slavery in 1861. You could say it by 1865, but you had to bring people along.
Yes.
And I would say if you're a Democrat with progressive values, there's some ways you've won the country over on gay marriage, on LGBTQ rights. But the high school sports thing is probably right now a step too far, and it may, frankly, forever be a step too far.
Yeah.
And so focus on the values that really, help win elections. If you're running in a political campaign, be true to your values, but in ways that win elections. I wrote a column last week about our friend Ezra Klein, and he's got a book coming out with Derek Thompson on this abundance agenda. And what really impresses me about that agenda is not only the specific policies that Ezra and Derek are talking about, making housing more affordable and things like that, but it's the values.
Mm-hmm.
It's the idea that we're a country on the move. We're a dynamic country. We can do big things. And to me, we're in such an atmosphere of depression, despair, negativity. To have politicians come along and say, hey, don't give up hope. We can do big things. That's a faith in America that, Ronald Reagan showed. That's a faith in America that Franklin Delano Roosevelt showed. And so to me, these are some values that are out there for Democrats to seize on.
I think that's right. A successful president knows how to read the country. He knows how to read the country. He doesn't try to get ahead of the country. He doesn't try to tell the country, solely how to be and to catch up with him. I think Bill Clinton understood that. Obama understood that. To your point about Lincoln, very much understanding it. I do think Trump, in his use of power, has a pretty canny sense about what the country, if not wants, what it responds to viscerally, emotionally. Kamala Harris is for they, them. Donald Trump is for you. It still kind of rings as a message that I think at least like a lot of Americans intuitively understand.
Yeah, I think he has two fundamental things that are on his side. The one is the sense that, we all need a secure base in our lives. One of my favorite sayings in psychology is that all of life is a series of daring explorations from a secure base. And our secure base for most of us is like a secure family. It's a secure home, a community that is prospering, but it's also a moral order, the idea that we're all have a common set of values. And so Trump says, you have no secure base. Your families are fragile. The moral order has been shredded, and I'm going to give you a secure base.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really foundational thing he argues. The second thing is, in my view, the highly educated people have created a caste system in America over the last 70 years so that, people with high school degrees die 8 years sooner than people with college degrees. People with high school degrees, their children fall 4 grade levels behind kids from other families by 6th grade. They're 4 grade levels lower. And so we have a caste system. And Trump says, I'm with you guys, the working class.
Mm-hmm.
And Democrats have gotten on the wrong side of both those gigantic issues. And those are epical issues.
Yeah.
And he builds on that in a lot of different ways. And so he did so last night just by celebrating the kid who wants to become a cop. Yep. He's not celebrating the kid who wants to become a neuroscientist.
Right, or college professor.
Right. And so he sends those cultural signals very successfully and very insistently.
David, I want to go back to your point about the moral order and society, which you've written so powerfully about. And what I had in mind was these 2 columns of yours, this powerful column in 2022 after Russia invaded Ukraine, where you talked about that sense of inspiration that a lot of Americans felt, regardless of party, seeing a people fighting for their country, standing up for what they saw as their values, their future, their liberty, and how inspiring that was for so many Americans. And then more recently, a piece about Trump as kind of a faux populist, someone who in language, in policy, in aesthetics, kind of trades in a certain kind of man of the people, and yet doesn't govern as a populist. How do you define fake populism? And more broadly, how has this swing happened so quickly, where what once inspired so many Americans now seems to be something that, in Congress on Tuesday night, you had so many members seeming to kind of thumb their nose at spending any more money on Ukraine?
Yeah, when I was a young journalist, I worked for the Wall Street Journal, and I was a foreign correspondent. I lived in Europe, and I covered the end of the Soviet Union, the independence of Ukraine, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the reunification of Germany, the end of apartheid, the creating of the Maastricht Treaty, really the European Union. And the ethos in those days was one of convergence, that walls were falling, barriers were falling, the world was coming together. Even our political system seemed to be coming together. China and Russia in those days seemed to be coming closer to democratic capitalism. So convergence. And that was sort of the heyday of the liberal world order. And pretty much since the first 25 years of this century, since 9/11, the age of convergence has gone into reverse. And we're now in the age of building walls. And countries are separating. And Donald Trump is the essence of a wall builder. He came to 2016, let's build a wall on the southern border. But now we're building a wall between us and Canada. We're building a wall between us and Europe. We're even building a wall internally. I'm not sure I've ever seen a president explicitly call out the opposing party and attack them for not applauding and being far left radicals or whatever he called them. But he's erecting walls. And so I think a lot of us still believe in liberal values. We believe in convergence. We like to have friends like Canada and France and the UK. We like, friends are valuable things to have. But Trump is a true isolationist and is building a wall around America. And so that I think is the shift in values. As for the faux populism, I've been around these people all my life. I graduated from college in 1983. I worked at National Review in 1984. And my first encounter with Trumpians was way back then, though we didn't know it at the time. There was a group at Dartmouth, a nice Ivy League college, called the Dartmouth Review. Mm-hmm. And famous people who've emerged from there, Laura Ingraham, who's on Fox, and Dinesh D'Souza, who's off in the swamplands of ideology somewhere. But they were very different than us. We were like earnest. We read Adam Smith and Edmund Burke. They were like, let's take on the left. And the classic Dartmouth Review action took place in 1986. A group of progressive students had erected a shanty on the quad at Dartmouth to protest apartheid, a thing very much worth opposing. And the Dartmouth Review guys, in the middle of the night with sledgehammers, broke it all down. And I remember thinking, that's appalling. A, apartheid really is terrible. We should not be defending it. But B, coming in with sledgehammers, like that's more Gestapo than Edmund Burke. And yet that kind of person who's in the elite universities, but who's a dissenter in the elite universities, who's fed up with the progressive orthodoxy that dominates those universities. So you get Elon Musk who went to Penn. You get Vivek Ramaswamy who went to Harvard and Yale. You go down the list. Steve Miller went to Duke. And these are elite dissenters from the university culture. They are not populists. And as a result, when they come to power, they don't really do all that much to help the working class. Like I talked about the health disparities, the education disparities, the family disparities. I would love it if the Trump administration would take on those substantive disparities that make it hard to be working class right now. But they don't do that. They go after NIH. They go after the Department of Education. They go after USAID. They go after the places where they think elite liberals live.
David, you're making me think about an idea that I want to run by you about Trump. It's that Trump has the wrong answers, but is asking some of the right questions. The right questions being, how do we end the war in Ukraine? How do we get Arab leaders to do more with Gaza? How do we deal with a weak Europe? How do we reform the federal government? And then how do we fix inflation? And I'm wondering if you think there's anything to that. I mean, is Trump forcing us to confront questions that American leaders have been ignoring for too long?
Yeah, I 1,000% agree with that. It's the wrong answer to the right question. And so, take, for example, we had education policies by Republicans and Democrats, starting with really George H.W. Bush and straight through to Obama, which said the way to succeed in this world is to get a college degree and get a white-collar job. And all the education reforms were geared toward getting people into college. Well, a lot of people don't want to go to college. They don't think it's right for them. It's not right for their skill set. And yet there was no policy to them. So Donald Trump identified that problem. Did he solve it? Of course not. But he did identify a core problem. And I find this is true again and again and again, that there's always some element of truth in what Trump is saying. Is there inefficiency in the federal government? Of course there is. Is Donald Trump have the right solution to it? No. And one of my big questions, I don't know what you think of this, is like, how much actual change is going to happen? Mm-hmm. How much is it just churn? How much is it stuff that's going to be blocked by the courts? How much it is Doge-like sort of show business, but no actual spending cuts? I mean, Trump did not talk about Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security last night, except for the Social Security fraud. And if you don't talk about that, you're not really talking about spending cuts. Yeah. So I just don't know how much we're looking at just a circus and how much we're looking at a policy revolution.
The thing that worries me about that, David, is that we're going to end up with this giant security blanket called America that has all these little holes in it, like that there's no normal pattern. There's no tightly knitted whole, WHOLE. Instead, there are just these little kind of like pockmarks that leave it weakened. I don't know what the plan is 2 months in. It just seems like it's Trump telling us we're in a golden age and, hey, he's better than George Washington. George Washington's now number 2. But where does it leave us? I think for a lot of Americans, every day is a scary day to wake up to. I mean, I'm just thinking of a piece our colleague David Wallace Wells wrote about the 5th anniversary of COVID. And you read it and you just come away thinking that the 2020s are the disaster decade.
Yeah, I guess I would say, like, I read a lot of history. What decade is better than ours? Like, every decade has their thing. Like the 1880s, there was severe economic depressions. There was savage inequalities. We were doing industrialization terribly. 1960s, assassinations, riots. Yeah. Every generation has their World War II, has their Civil War, has whatever. And so we're no different. And we are going through a very hard time. But I guess the question I would ask is it really the world is coming to an end, or are we catastrophizing?
Yeah.
And there's no decade in history except maybe the 1990s I would like to go back to.
Yeah.
And that's just because I really like Snow Patrol, and they were big in the 1990s. But no, most historical eras have their gigantic challenges. I wasn't alive for the depths of the Cold War, but that must have been a pretty terrifying time.
Terrifying time. David, this is why I love talking to you. No, but you think about it. I mean, even in the 1980s, which are, remembered as kind of a Reagan golden age, the end of the Soviet Union, I remember that fear I felt about the idea of a nuclear holocaust, that it was a different kind of fear than I've ever felt in my life. And you're right. There is no perfect decade. I mean, I remember the Hairspray and the bad movies in the 90s, David, so I don't necessarily want to go back to that. But to that point, David, I mean, you write about culture and feelings as well. And I want to end with this. This Trump moment just has so many people on edge, from Washington, D.C. and the mood there to farmers and workers, in red states who are seeing the system freeze up on them. And there's just this kind of casual cruelty at work with all of this quote unquote momentum of Trump's. You published a book that was a guide to fostering human connection. What has been on your mind just over the last several weeks, watching where things are heading, not just in the White House, but in the country itself, in terms of that sense of kind of human connection?
Yeah, it's funny. There's a Bruce Springsteen song from 2012 called We Take Care of Our Own. And that song has a brilliant double message, which is we love our people and we take care of our own. But it's also like we only take care of our own. And Trump does this. He's like, it's all about the in group and the out group.
Yeah.
And we take care of our own, but those people in the out group, they're the enemy. And I have to say, I travel a lot, and my travels, people are nice. Like, most people are just incredibly generous in a red or blue. And so I find on a local level, people go out of their way for each other. But it's in the national level, and when you're dealing with strangers, and especially when you're dealing with the world through the prism of the media that you don't directly encounter, then the nastiness becomes so easy. Mm-hmm. And so Trump plays on an abstracted negativity and abstracted hatred that I don't think shows up all that often. It does, obviously, sometimes, but in day-to-day life.
Totally. David, thanks so much for joining me.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
If you like this show, follow it on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. This show is produced by Derek Arthur, Sophia Alvarez-Boyd, Vishaka Durba, Phoebe Lett, Christina Samuelewski, and Jillian Weinberger. It's edited by Kari Pitkin, Allison Bruzek, and Annie Rose Strasser. Engineering, mixing, and original music by Isaac Jones, Sonia Herrero, Pat McCusker, Carol Saburo, and Afim Shapiro. Additional music by Amin Sahota. The fact-check team is Kate Sinclair, Mary Marge Locker, and Michelle Harris. Audience strategy by Shannon Busta, Christina Samuelewski, and Adrian Rivera. The executive producer of Times Opinion Audio is Annie Rose Dresser.